Bonsoir, mon ami. Today we are going to talk about one of the most symbolic processes in human history, the French Revolution. This process had important causes, very iconic characteristics, and deep consequences, not only in France, but in the whole world. In the big picture, we can say that the French Revolution is the process in which the French monarchy was abolished and a democratic republic form of government was put in place in that nation. However, we have to know that this was a deep, long, and violent process to understand it, because the French Revolution became a model for other big social changes that occurred and are still happening in contemporary history. So, to better understand it, I am going to explain these 12 phases of the French Revolution. Let us go to the first one, its beginnings. By the year 1789, France had lost the 7 Years' War to Britain, and the king, Louis XVI, was bankrupt. The monarchy was in a deep economic crisis. Also, the bourgeoisie, the social class to which bankers, lawyers, merchants, and business owners belonged, had too little representation in the government of the king. They had money, but the nobility had more privileges than they did. And finally, with the ideas of the Enlightenment, many important people wanted to change the French government. They didn't want to give the whole power to the king, and many of them didn't want to have a king at all. So in that year, the king decided to raise the taxes to the bourgeoisie, but not to the nobility. So important members of the bourgeoisie formed the National Assembly. In the National Assembly, they decided to form a new government, one with a constitution above the king himself. Therefore, when the king gathered his army outside the city of Paris, the members of the National Assembly called and gathered the workers and common people from the city of Paris. The common workers of Paris were very angry in those days. Food and services provided by the king were not being delivered because of the crisis of the monarchy. So, when the people of the city were told that the king was going to bring his army into the city to regain his power, the people stormed into the Bastille, a prison, a jail that was administered by the monarchy and was a symbol of the power of the king. So, after this event, the king knew that he had to either to get to an agreement with the National Assembly or to abdicate and leave the French throne. But the National Assembly had other plans. It abolished the feudal system and proclaimed the Declaration of the Rights of Men. All this happened in 1789. In 1792, the First French Republic was proclaimed. However, tensions went higher and higher between the nobility and the new government. When the servants were freed from their feudal lords, many executed justice with their own hands and killed their old lords. The most symbolic scene of this conflict was the decapitation of the king Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, his wife, the queen, in 1793. They were both declared traitors by the new French Republic. In this period, Maximilien Robespierre, with the support of the most radical group of the revolutionaries, the Jacobins, took control of the government. This period of the revolution is known like the Terror, because so many people were decapitated by the French government, and not only noble people, but anyone who opposed the Jacobins. However, in 1794, a less radical group of the French revolutionaries took control of the revolution, and Robespierre himself was sentenced to the guillotine. At the same time that the terror was happening in the cities of France, the neighboring monarchies allied against the young French Republic, because of the fear that the same thing was happening in French soil could happen in Austria, Prussia, and other European kingdoms. So war is declared on both sides, and France is not prepared. It is in this moment when a young general, Napoleon Bonaparte, wins important battles against the enemies of the French Republic. He is considered a national hero, but he takes part in a conspiracy with the pretext that he wants to save the Republic, and a new government is formed in France in 1799. Note that this is considered to be the end of the First French Revolution, because from the storming of the Bastille in 1789 until the Napoleonic rule, there were constant popular demonstrations and unrest. And after 1799, life inside France was peaceful at last, and many principles of the French Revolution were kept in the Constitution. However, we must understand what happened after that to know how the French Revolution persisted. Because outside of France, peace was far, far away. The European monarchies and France were still not in peace. War continued, and Napoleon had extensive victories against all major European armies. Napoleon invaded almost the entire European continent, but then he, once a defensor of the principles of the French Revolution, proclaimed himself emperor of France in 1804. He invaded Spain, Austria, Germany, Italy, and so many countries, and removed old monarchies to place puppet governments in those places, extending, however, some principles of the French Revolution, but at the same time installing authoritarian regimes in Europe. Napoleon had his biggest defeat in Russia. And also the British won against him his last battle, the famous Battle of Waterloo. The Russians and the British and other important European monarchies signed the Peace of Paris, and a moderate monarchy will rule France from 1815 until 1848. There were some popular uprisings in that period, especially in 1830. But in 1848, a second French Revolution took down the monarchy that was placed in 1815. But yet again, in 1852, Napoleon III, the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, was proclaimed emperor, and he ruled France for almost 20 years. Yet, after some important military defeats against Prussia and other nations, he abdicated and left France for good. Some French parties wanted to place another king, but in 1871, the Paris Commune, a massive popular uprising, took control of that city for more than 3 months, with a very tragic and violent result. After that year, there were no more serious attempts to re-establish a monarchy in France, and that country has been a republic ever since. The importance of the French Revolution goes beyond that country. Nations in all continents of the world observed this process and wanted to copy some of its principles. Even today, the model of the French Revolution is very important to understand some processes that take place in modern republics, when one government is replaced for another in the name of liberty, equality, and fraternity. I hope this video was of your help and taste. See you next time, mon ami.